Welcome to yet another episode of Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Hi, I'm Dr. Debra Dupree, your host and founder of the DCM podcast. Today's guest speaker comes to us with a different shift in mindset. Chris Johnsen, a very successful attorney out of Texas, talks to us about the burnout he experienced and the result of how he changed his mindset in terms of his practice of the law, how he recruited associates, and how they thrive in a multi-state area. Really creating an opportunity for what do attorneys look for and what are they wanting in today's work climate. And so Chris has a fascinating experience with 14 years of law behind him and had the opportunity to work in big law, saw it firsthand, had the corner office with the special, client, conversation area. But he found that wasn't enough. He found that it, really didn't bring him the satisfaction that he wanted. And so listen and learn as we move into our interview with Chris Johnsen, attorney and successful litigator in the state of Texas, Houston to be exact. And so if you want to learn more about Chris before you actually listen to our podcast, visit johnsonlaw.com, JOHNSEN law.com. So don't go away. Time to subscribe if you haven't already. Time to let your colleagues and friends know, particularly if you want a different mindset about how to practice in the field of law. Well, here we are, Chris. I'm so delighted to have you here. Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
No problem. Chris, I think you have a pretty interesting story. And so I want to give a little backdrop to our viewers and listeners here. I know they've just heard your introduction and so forth. But I'm aware that you are still an active practicing litigator and who also handles transactional and management kinds of concerns. And so what I've gleaned from you is that there's been a shift in your mindset about how you approach the field of law, how you approach the recruitment of associates, and how you approach your clients. And so help our viewers and listeners understand just what has that shift been for you and what's driven it for you?
So I think the shift has evolved over time, and there really was one main factor that really pushed it faster. But I would say it was a shift and an evolution over time, being in different experiences and having to manage and resolve conflict in different ways. I would say the most pigeonholed and before the mind shift was when I was doing mostly litigation and I was in big law. And so you're in that bubble, you're with the people that you surround yourself with, and it's very competitive, which, by the way, they make law school coincidentally very, very competitive with ranking and grades and all that stuff. And then you go into this big law environment, it's very competitive to bill your hours and make partner and all that kind of stuff. And the partners are very competitive with each other. And, just the practice of law itself is competitive. I like to think about it as one of the only professions where we eat our own young. There's other professions where we don't do that. We, not really me, but attorneys, and it's happened to me, pick on younger lawyers that are less experienced and try to use that to their advantage in a case, right? And I do think there's a time and a place for certain types of conflict strategies and litigation, but then in transactional, and this is where I'll talk about the evolution, it's different. And I do like doing litigation and transactional because I believe it makes you a more well-rounded attorney. It's hard for a lot of attorneys because they're not able to flip that switch. I fortunately am able to do that. So I can flip the switch and act the role and deal with conflict in different ways, which is more appropriate in the circumstances. But back to this main, like the precipice of where it all changed was when I got burned out in big law. And that way of doing things, it's almost hard to describe unless you've been in that environment. And after leaving that environment, it takes a couple years to get all the dust off of you and have this fresh perspective. But certainly leaving that environment, you see that it's not the end all be all, right? There's not this pot of gold at the ends of the rainbow. I was running and chasing those things, and other things are more important, or maybe just as important, which has broadened my perspective. And my original background was in business. So when I started doing business again after leaving big law, and I started having my own businesses and managing my own employees, which included other attorneys, that's a whole nother level of conflict resolution. So that has really tempered kind of how I deal with all different situations, which is different in each situation. But I think being versatile has really changed my mindset overall across the board.
Okay. So there's a couple of things I said, Chris. Thank you so much for enlightening us on that, because again, you use the word evolution, you know, the shift, the perspective, and all of that is reflective of a mindset that's open to growth rather than living, and you called it the bubble. You know, what I liked what you said, and I want to elaborate on this, because you talked about acting the role, you know, but not necessarily living the role. And so it is about role playing, and that when you're on stage, shall we say, or in the courtroom or in that litigation advocacy role, you know, there's the ability to play the role. And I think that what I'm hearing you say, and I certainly have heard over my time, having been married to two attorneys, full disclosure, okay, you know, that they didn't know when to turn off the litigator role. And so that came home with them. And so, so talk to that as far as, you know, acting the role while you're in it, but not making it your life.
Right. Okay. So when you do litigation day in, day out, and you're billing 10 hours a day, let's call that 50 to 60 hours a week, which means you're working more than that. You're just billing that, and you're always in it. And every word you put down, every argument you make, there's some judge questioning you. There's the other side ready to attack you. You're also living in even your colleagues, it's not as adversarial, but it's adversarial in a different sense. It's almost this like it's a competition of the egos, and you're just in it all the time. It almost takes over. And I have to admit that it did take me over a little bit for a while. And in law school, remember I said I was in business before becoming a lawyer. In law school, I said I will never let that happen. I will never because in law school, you're taught to think like a lawyer, but I didn't want that to change who I was. And it did eventually over time. And how it transpired was mainly being really annoyed at everything. So, and I didn't even realize it, but having this attitude where like everything bothered me, everything annoyed me, almost like hypercritical of everything. And again, I didn't even realize it. It wasn't until I removed myself from the environment and I really like looked back, I realized how entrenched I was in that thinking. And I was able to like detox essentially and start being myself more again. I think litigation's great, and I still do litigation, but that high intensity where you can never let it go, and there's this intense docket, it can wear on you, and it's worn on many people.
Right. Yeah, no, I can definitely see that. I have taught dispute resolution in a law school for several years, and so I'm well aware of how, again, having been married to do, you know, the training, the transformation that you go through while going through law school, because it does teach you how to think differently. And I really love and appreciate that too, because I my whole career has been around attorneys professionally and personally. And I do a lot of expert witness work, working closely with litigation attorneys and so forth. But it's really true about what you had to say. And I think actually I can claim that one reason I did not ever finish law school is that I did not like what I was seeing happen to people that were already lawyers and how they became, having known them before they went in. And I didn't want to change in that direction. Again, I love the analytical mind. I'm attracted to that and appreciate it. Yes, we're definitely needed. There's always a place for it. But again, it can't transform yourself unless you have, a sense of well-being and a sense of, wait a minute, who am I? Who are you, Chris Johnsen? Who am I, Debra Dupree? And maintain that sense of self.
Right. Who am I? What an interesting question, right? If the only thing you can say is, well, who are you? If the only thing you can answer is what you do, then that's sad. Then you've lost a sense of who you are.
Yeah. And yet work is very incredibly important to us, and having that role, that sense of identity in your profession is critical. But that's not the only part of your identity. And that's where it's really, really important then to make that shift. Now, going back to something you said earlier, is that because you talked about transactional, you talked about litigation, and then you've also been in business. So how do you approach conflict in each of those situations? What are some of the hallmarks of how you approach this with this change mindset that you bring to the field of law?
Okay, so business, I love to be, and this might be in a lot of situations, but I'm focused on business. I like to be very proactive, and meaning there are things that I can do to prevent conflict from even arising in the first place. And what I like to be very transparent with the employees. I like to share how the company's doing. I like to have standing meetings. I like an atmosphere of just people being able to share whatever they want. I like them giving feedback, even if I don't necessarily like the feedback. I found that when I do these things in a very open and collaborative atmosphere, that it removes some of the problems that can exist. That I think a lot of conflict situations that exist between management and employment is when they don't understand something, right? The company might be afraid to mention that there's a real estate downturn and the company's not doing that well, because God, if we tell the employees that they might leave, and then the employees in their mind are thinking, well, geez, the company's doing great. And if there's inflation and I need raises, so when raises don't happen and bonuses don't happen, they don't understand, right? But there's an information disconnect because the company didn't want to share that information with the employees. So I'm very open and transparent. That's just my strategy. And so I do a lot of proactive things and cultural things to avoid conflict from arising in the first place. And, sometimes it does, and that involves talking and things like that. I very much take my lawyer hat off. There's nothing more obnoxious than, someone trying to air their grievances and the person on the other side of the table is just lawyering them up. I don't need to do that. I can just listen. I can be a real human, just talk to them. So it's different. Okay, so one step further would be transactional, right? And transactional conflict will rise over different negotiating different terms in an agreement and things like that. So that involves a lot of intellect and being able to address arguments, but being able to address them in a way that's not obnoxious. It's not abrasive to the other side. I oftentimes like to just ask questions. Even if I know the answer, I'll ask questions just so the other side feels heard. Sometimes I think I know the answer too, and they'll give me a piece of information that shows where they're coming from. But that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to give up my client's position, but I know more, so I can counter with something else that might be helpful to them, or maybe we can come up with some kind of solution to agree. Because ultimately, and one of the nice things about transactional work is the attorneys want the deal to close, right? They're not there. Their goal isn't to have the deal not close. They want the deal to close. They just want to protect their clients in the process. And the other might be posturing and things like that, right? So that's one step in the middle, more conflict, right? And then there's litigation, right? So litigation is a zero-sum game. If you go to court, it's a zero-sum game. That's how the system was designed. That's not always the result, especially if you go to arbitration, especially you could go in front of a judge or a jury and they give a mixed verdict. But ultimately, and I tell my clients, like, look, if all you want is to win, like that is your option, right? You win, they lose, you got to go to trial. Not many people go to trial. They don't have the stomach for it. They don't want to invest the time. They don't want to invest the resources. They don't want to deal with the uncertainty. So, 90 most, by far most, let's just call it nearly all cases settle, at least civil cases. I can't speak to criminal or anything like that. I only do civil cases. So with that said, getting to the settlement table is still about, in my opinion, leverage. It's getting points of leverage all along the way with the tools given to us, which are procedural rules, discovery, other things, to put your client in a better position. So when you go to a mediation or you have some other kind of settlement discussion, then you can negotiate down from there to a resolution that is favorable for your client. And one of the things that I always like, and this is dealing with attorneys or even dealing with the other side, if I always think of, fight or flight, and if you back an animal in a corner and they have nowhere to go, they're just going to fight. So, and that's not helpful to my clients. Now, it's good if I back someone in the corner and I give them an out, I give them an escape, but I can be strategic about the escape that I give them. Or if I know that's their escape, I can do it in a way where I'm 2 chess moves ahead and I'm forcing them into where I want them to be. They still feel like it's a win. They still feel like they got out of it, but I'm the one that won because I set that whole chess move up to begin with, and it ultimately benefited my client.
Yeah. So you've really created an escape hatch in a way that allows each of you to exit gracefully and with resolution.
Right.
Okay, great. And then I'm intrigued. You used the word prior to our interview starting about gladiators, and you also had shared with me about your model for how you run your law firm. I'd like you to address a little bit about the kind of gladiator you look for, and how do you recruit attorneys, and what kind of mindset are you looking for that fits in your model of how to do law, and how successful you are.
So our attorneys are very entrepreneurial. That's the culture that I set up. It's probably it's a reflection of me, but we are very independent go-getters. We believe in equity, transparency. For that reason, our compensation system is the same for all of us. It's a mathematical formula. It's not some arbitrary salary determined by higher up management. I get paid the same way that everyone else gets paid, and everyone sees what everyone gets paid, and they see what I get paid. So there's transparency, there's equity, there's fairness. It removes politics. And it's a culture of, look, if you want to do more, the sky's the limit. This is your ability to do more. And so I want to empower people to succeed. That's what I want more than anything. And so, when we're talking about the gladiators, I'm almost thinking about, what's the playbook? What are the rules, right? Because the organization sets the rules. So the rules that were set for me were, you're going to start as a first-year associate. You're going to build 2,000 plus a year. You're going to get some form of a bonus. We're not going to promise you what that is, but some form of a bonus at the end of each year. And if you do good, whatever that means, and maybe get a book of business or whatever, that wasn't clearly defined either, then you will make partner. Right. So that was the formula set for me. And even then, you don't know how much you're going to make as a partner, a salary, or whatever. There's a lot of black boxes. There's a lot of unknowns, and there's a caste system that's set forth. And I don't like the caste system. I don't like the staffer at the bottom, then paralegals, which are kind of staff, then your attorneys, and then there's a caste system in the attorneys. There's the associates at the bottom, and then there's the more senior associates, and then there's the of counsel and the partners, and the equity partners, are the top big dogs. So I set up a system where everyone's the same. I just call everyone an attorney. We don't need a caste system. We're all experienced attorneys with years of experience. I feel like that's juvenile to put everyone in a box. We can just be attorneys. We're all the same. We're all equal. We're here just to do great work and enjoy our practice. There's nothing sadder to me than hearing an attorney that's like, I have to do something else. And I'm like, why? Why don't you just change the way you practice law? Why do you have to give it all up together? So what I think I've done very well is come up with a platform that enables lawyers to have satisfaction in their practice again.
Yeah, I think that's marvelous because, again, having worked around the field and with many attorneys over the years, again, that level of satisfaction declines oftentimes over time, and their success is more measured in, extrinsic things like what they, what kind of car they drive, and how many cases have they won, or what kind of house do they live in, rather than how personally happy am I. And certainly I'm aware of divorce, one is very high among attorneys, as is alcoholism and drug use. So that's a reflection then too of how unhappy people are, and yet they're wedded to their image as a lawyer, that they feel the need to keep going. And so I really laud and commend you for that change in vision for what you bring to the table. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, because it is all about decoding the conflict mindset, and so this is just another slice, another layer of that. And I'm curious because I know, again, Chris, you made the reference to a remote practice, and yet I know you live in Houston. So say a little bit more about that, because if somebody is interested in talking to you, what can they expect?
So we're a virtual firm. It's always been that way. I always had these fancy offices, which I'm not going to lie, it was cool at first, but I remember being a partner sitting there in the corner office, and I had a separate sitting area for my clients to come in, and a client came in once in maybe a 2-year period. Clients never want to come in the office. They never wanted to come downtown because it was a hassle coming downtown. The only time they would was to use our conference rooms if they had to for a deposition or something like that. So what a waste of money for that office space. But here's the other side of it. Even back before COVID, lawyers didn't want to come into the office, right? I didn't want to commute 30, 45 minutes in, 30, 45 minutes back. There were a lot of good things about coming in the office, but lawyers don't have to be in the office. The only thing is be for depositions and things like that. But otherwise, lawyers can practice wherever they want. They're fully capable of doing, especially transactional attorneys. That's what they want. So when I first did it, it was 2 reasons: to lower overhead and also give attorneys what they want. That's an added perk. And then the third one that was more unanticipated is it helps with recruitment. It's a lot easier to recruit an attorney when they don't even have to leave their house. They can be anywhere they want. So it's worked out to be really, really well. We didn't skip a beat during COVID. Other firms were scrambling. They were figuring things out. We were moving forward. We had a temporary injunction hearing like 2 or 3 weeks after the lockdown in Texas. And I mean, all our systems were remote already. It wasn't a problem at all.
Yeah. Well, I'm really thrilled to hear that because like you, I was already doing things via Zoom or a virtual platform. And I've been trying to get some of my clients to move towards that because of the being in Southern California, traffic was getting horrendous. And, where I could get someplace 45 minutes in the morning, and then it would take me 2.5 hours later leaving that place. It's like, oh my gosh, what a waste of time and energy and costly. And And so like you, I was able to transition very quickly to Zoom and actually help some law firms and help a couple of legal associations make that move too, and thriving in it. And it's opened up many opportunities that we wouldn't have had before. So yeah, great. So Chris, do you have a website? How would people reach out to you if they want to learn more about Chris Johnsen and Johnsen Law?
Sure. My last name is spelled Johnsen. It's a Scandinavian spelling. And so the law firm is www.Johnsen Law, spelled the same way, Johnsen, johnsonlaw.com. You can check out the careers page. You could check out the other materials. If you want to schedule a consultation, there's a scheduling widget for that. And thank you so much for having me on the show.
Well, thank you, Chris, for coming on, because I know, having met you through our mutual affiliation, the Clout Group, that I knew that you're coming in with a different mindset. I thought, that's somebody I need to have on my show. So thank you, Chris. I appreciate it, changing the conflict mindset and a different way of approaching lawyering. I love it. So thank you all for being here. And again, if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. Be notified of our future schedule of tremendous guest speakers just like Chris here today. And let us know what you think of what we talked about today, and how you see this possibly influencing a shift and change in your own lifestyle and conflict mindset. So again, Dr. Debra Dupree, founder and host, Decoding the Conflict Mindset. See you again very soon. Well, I hope you enjoyed our interview with Chris Johnsen and gained some valuable insights about how to do the business of lawyering different. And with that, some exciting entrepreneurial insights about what people are looking for, both in terms of consumers of legal services as well as those who work in it. Our next guest is coming up is Annette Taylor. Now, Annette also brings a very unique perspective to human beings and our behavior, and draws upon her fascination with ancestral beginnings, and going back to the very foundation of the beginning of humankind, and talks about how it can impact our ability to be civil in today's challenging world. So mark your calendars, come back in a couple of weeks and listen to Annette Taylor and I as we explore our ancestral foundations and what makes life so challenging today. It's sure to be a good one. So if you haven't already subscribed, come back and join us. We look forward to having you. Dr. Debra Dupree, the Mindset Doc, host and founder of Decoding the Conflict Mindset.